Good morning, everyone. This is Tommy from the Ravens Creek Study. I am picking up again on In Time 101. This is looking at Revelation 12. We've been through a lot in this course. For those of you who have been following, we're looking at this. I think that Revelation 12 is an overview of everything that we've already gone through. Essentially, we've got the span of the entirety of the week. We've looked at all of the little details of what we expect and when and why and where some of the prophecies of the Old Testament fit. And once you know kind of that general framework, when you know that paradigm, if you will, there's the 7 years. These events happen in these 7 years. It's pretty easy to then read the prophets in the Old Testament and to read the prophecies of the New Testament and to figure out, well, what is it that they're trying to map out here? What is it that they're saying? And one of the difficulties of commentaries is that oftentimes a commentary will look at the historical setting and they'll say, okay, well, these things happened in this time of history. And they might be right that, yeah, there was a bit of a display here, but then oftentimes the prophets are looking past that. And you have the same thing with the book of Revelation, where a lot of the commentaries that you'll pick up with the book of Revelation, they either put the book of Revelation in the past in AD 70, and there's a lot of parallels that you can find there, but there's not that fullness. It doesn't seem to add up with every detail, and they're like, oh, well, that was just kind of extra glitz and glam. And of course, they don't say it that way. Um, they'll say that was apocalyptic language, that was just the language. It wasn't actually, they didn't expect the stars to actually fall out of the sky. I mean, that was just apocalyptic language here. Um, you have that problem with Revelation as well. What we find here in Revelation 12, it's just a reaffirmation again of everything that we've already looked at. A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. This is the first verse here. It sounds reminiscent of Joseph's dream in Genesis 39. That if you go back to Genesis 39, and specifically verse 7 is where you find the tie-in here, but Joseph has a dream that the sun and the moon and 11 stars bow down to him. And the interpretation of the dream is given by his father Israel, his father Jacob. And he says, will I, your mother, and your 11 brothers bow down to you? So we find that the sun was Israel, the moon is Rachel, and the 11 stars are his brothers. It makes it so that this verse here, who's the woman that's in heaven? Who is this woman that Revelation 12 is talking about? It has to be Israel. Other people who say no, it's Zion. Well, that doesn't make sense because, again, it just doesn't seem to tie in correctly. And of course, others have said other things than Zion. Some would say it's Mary. Some would say it's, anyway. I don't need to go into all of the things. I stick on it's Israel. To me, that just seems like it's obvious. It seems like it can't be anything else. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that he might devour the child the moment it was born. Now the description of this dragon, it sounds reminiscent of the 4th beast of Daniel 7. And there's a reason for that. When you look at the beast of Revelation 13, it has a very similar description to the dragon. There's only slight differences. In Daniel 8:10, the Antichrist cast down some of the starry hosts. That should be hosts, not hoses. Starry hosts, and tramples upon them. Now, if we find Revelation 12 here if we find Revelation 12 here that this red dragon casts a third of the stars of the sky and flings them to the earth, if we say that that's like in Daniel 8:10 when this little horn figure, this Antichrist figure, tramples the stars, well, why would that then mean that in Revelation 12 these are demons? Have you ever heard that in Revelation 12 that the third of the stars, it represents the angels, and that Satan took a third of the angels with him when he fell from heaven? But that's not what's going on here, because I mean, two things. One, the stars might pertain to the stars in the crown. I said might, it might not, but they might pertain to the stars that are in the crown, which would then be the which would then be Israel, right? That he took a third of Israel and threw it to the earth. Second of all, we find, I have the verses down here later, the saints in Daniel 12:3, those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens. In Philippians 2:15, you shine like the stars in the universe. We find verses that talk about how the saints shine like stars. And so, I mean, the stars could represent saints. Again, not saying it does, not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying there are other options. It doesn't have to be the angels that are cast down with Lucifer. And third of all, why would Satan trample upon his own minions? Why would he cast down the angels only to trample on them and be like, now you subject to me? I mean, that's not how this really works. I don't think that that's really how this works. I don't know that people have made that connection who do hold to that, though. And so I throw this out there in that. Hopefully you can understand a bit better. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God, and they will take care of her for 1,260 days. Now, the King James and the New King James, maybe other versions that I haven't read, but I know those two versions translate this correctly. That verse here, and they will take care of her for 1,260 days. The NIV, the NASV, a lot of the other versions, they don't translate it, and they will take care of her. They say something else. They'll say something like, where she will be nourished, or where she will be taken care of, or something like that. But it's not what it says in the Greek. I mean, this isn't like a debated passage. It's clear in the Greek. It says, they will take care of her. But the problem is, when you have a theology that doesn't understand who the they is, they don't know exactly how to translate it. And so instead of just being honest to the text and translating it correctly, you have versions that don't. And that's a struggle that we all have to deal with. But so it is. And it's our primary call. The whole point of this verse that I wanted to get at here. It is our primary call as the church to take in Israel during her time of need. If the woman is Israel, if she's being chased by the dragon, she flees into the wilderness, it's, again, just everything that we've already discussed. It's just a reiteration of everything we've already gone through. How does God meet with Israel face to face in the wilderness? To look again at Ezekiel 20:33-35. It is through the faces of those who constitute, quote, the church. This wilderness drama is a recapitulation of the Exodus story, meeting with God at Sinai. If you don't know what recapitulation means, it's just a reiteration. It's just it's stating it again. It's a repetition in history. The Exodus story, they came out of Egypt unto Sinai, met with God at Sinai, went from Sinai through the wilderness to come unto the promised land. You have again where in the end of the age, Israel comes out from Babylon, out from the nations, out from that world system to meet with God in the wilderness place. And when Israel meets with God in the wilderness place, they're then brought to a place where they are taken back to the promised land at the return of the Messiah. I mean, the whole pattern is set up there. It's clear, it's blatant. When you know it, when you know it, you see it. It's obvious. You have another pattern though. Just as Jacob wrestled with God, so must the people Jacob, Israel, wrestle with God. It's the same kind of story being reiterated over and over again. It's a recapitulation, if you will. Isaiah 28:11. Very well then, with foreign lips and strange tongues, God will speak to this people. Jeremiah 31:2. Those who survive the sword shall find favor in the desert. Zechariah 10:9. Though I scatter them among the peoples, yet in distant lands they will remember me. They and their children will survive, and they will return. Again, these verses are just to be thrown out there to show you it is present. It's not like I'm just making this up because I have a fanciful theory. It's over and over and over again in the scriptures. Matthew 24:45. Who is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants of his household to give them their food at the proper time? Now, when you look at the overall Matthew 24 and 25, Jesus is giving an overview of the end of the age. Matthew 24 leads right into chapter 25. So when you read about the sheep and the goats, when you read about the different parables, the man with 10 talents, the man with 5 talents, and the man with 1 talent, when you read these different parables, the 5 wise and foolish virgins, you have these stories right there in the context of the disciples asked Jesus, "What's the sign of the end of the age and of your coming?" Jesus then says, "These are the things that are the signs of the end." And you even have in Matthew 24 the coming of Jesus, the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds, and the gathering of the elect unto him. It's all right there in Matthew 24. And then Jesus goes from that and starts then explaining to his disciples, here's some things that you need to know if you're going to make it to the end, if you're going to make it through the end, if you're going to endure unto the end. And this passage here, I guess this verse here, who is the faithful and wise servant? This is right there in the midst of when Jesus is telling his disciples, this is what I'm expecting of you in order to be able to make it to the end. So the passage concerns the end of the age. So who is the servant that will provide food to Israel at the proper time? That's the only way I can see to read it. Who is the servant that will provide food to Israel at the proper time? Or to whoever else is fleeing into the wilderness, that whoever else might constitute that woman who's fleeing into the wilderness, who we are then taking in the end of the age. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the world astray, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. One other place in Scripture mentions Michael, and I'm Daniel 12:1, and I know that it's also mentioned in Daniel 10, but still you've got Revelation and Daniel. They're the only 2 places in the whole of the Scripture that mention Michael the angel. You have in Daniel 12:1 the same context. At that time, Michael, the great prince of your people, will arise. He'll stand up. So you have in Revelation 12, Michael stands up. Revelation in Daniel 12, Michael stands up. This gives us a great ability to be able to determine what's happening in Revelation 12 and when is this. So what time is this in Daniel 12:1? It's halfway through the tribulation, for the verse continues, there will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. And we've dealt with this verse before. You know about this verse. This is halfway through the tribulation. So when we get to Revelation 12, we see that he's using a similar language, that he's seeing Michael stand up just as Daniel was told Michael will stand up. We know then Revelation 12 has to then be talking about the same event as what's going on in Daniel 12:1 and 2 here. That the result of this time of distress, at the end of it, the wise shall shine like the stars, like the brightness of the heavens. We have to understand that whole sweep of Daniel 12:1 through 3 is exactly what we expect for Revelation 12 here. It has to then be speaking about the tribulation and not 1900 years ago or some other place in history, nor can it be speaking about the middle of the tribulation and then the rest of the book of Revelation is going to be dealing with something else. No. This isn't like a huge progression in the book of Revelation where at chapter 6 we start the beginning of the tribulation, and at Revelation 19 that's the end of the tribulation. It continues to recycle. It's a recapitulation in and of itself, that the seals, the trumpets, the bowls, they're all I don't want to use the word regurgitation, but that's kind of the word that comes to mind. It's a repetition over and over again. The seals go from the beginning to the end. The trumpets go from just past the beginning to the end. The bowls go from, where I don't want to say it's from beginning to end, but at the same time, you get the point that the end of the seals is the end of the tribulation. The end of the trumpets is the end of the tribulation. The end of the bowls of wrath is the end of the tribulation, and then all of the details in between. So you have the seals go right into the trumpets, but in between the trumpets and the bowls of wrath, you have Revelation 12 through 15, right? So you have Revelation 12, 13, and 14, and you see at the end of chapter 14, there's the harvest of the earth. So we have Revelation 12 here. It seems like it's the middle of the tribulation. We have from the middle to the end from Revelation 12 through 14. This is how we should be reading the passages of the end times. We should be able, by this point, if you've come this far in my study here, you should by this point be able to pick up the Old Testament or the New Testament, seeing passages that deal with the end times and say, he's talking about this. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. And then the next verse would be then talking about how the serpent spews water from his mouth, but the earth opens up and swallows the water. I couldn't fit all of it onto the slide. So this passage here tells us that the first part of Revelation 12 is also that last 3.5 years. For this is a repetition of that same statement. You find in Revelation 12:6, the woman flees to the wilderness to get out of the reach of the serpent. And here in verse 13 and onward, that's exactly what's happening. Is it the same event twice? Yes. It's not 2 different events at 2 different times. At the beginning of the chapter, these 2 were in heaven, now they're both on earth. This is not 2 different events, though. We can tell because it's the same description in 12:6 as we have in 12:13 through 16. The time, times, and half a time comes from Daniel again telling us when this is. It comes from Daniel 7. I guess it's more than one place in Daniel. Again, by this time in this study, you should be able to recognize time, times, and half a time. It's a measurement that comes out of the timeline in Daniel. It's the last 3.5 years. There's even the mention of the water spewing out of the dragon's mouth, where in Daniel 9:26, it speaks of the end, quote, coming like a flood. And so that's going to conclude this overview. Again, just kind of that overview, meshing all of the details together, blending it together, giving us one more affirmation of what we're talking about is indeed the way that we should be looking at this. Until next time, grace and peace to you in Christ. Thanks for listening. I feel like this video was kind of hodgepodge together. I don't know why, but it didn't flow very well. Maybe you can comment below and tell me otherwise if you thought otherwise. Anyway, until next time, grace and peace to you.